New York City shimmered that October night, a city of glass and gold, where the skyline itself seemed drunk on its own reflection. Inside the marble ballroom of the Montgomery Foundation's annual charity gala, the world's wealthiest mingled under chandeliers that could pay off most people's mortgages. But even amid all the opulence, all the champagne laughter, there was one woman everyone's eyes kept drifting toward: Lila Montgomery. At just 23, she carried herself with the kind of poise that came from a lifetime of being watched. The only daughter of Charles Montgomery, tech billionaire and philanthropist, Lila had grown up in a world where money wasn't a problem. Loneliness was. Her mother had died when she was a teenager, and since then, every public appearance beside her father had felt like a performance. Tonight was no different. She stood near the panoramic window, champagne flute in hand, pretending to enjoy the view of Manhattan's skyline. But her mind was elsewhere, somewhere quieter, simpler. That was when she saw him. Across the room, a tall man in a black tuxedo leaned casually against the bar, his posture relaxed, his confidence effortless. His hair was dark, slicked back neatly, and when he laughed, it came from somewhere deep, the kind of laugh that made people turn and smile without even knowing why. Damian Rowe. She'd heard the name whispered already. The rising star from Wall Street, the guy who just tripled his investors' money, the genius who turned nothing into millions. But what struck her wasn't his reputation. It was the way he looked at her, steady, deliberate, as if the whole glittering world had narrowed to just her face. Moments later, he was beside her, offering a new glass of champagne. "You look like you could use a refill," he said, his tone soft but confident. Lila smiled politely. "You've got a good eye for strangers." "Hard not to notice the most captivating one in the room," he replied. The line should have felt rehearsed. Maybe it was. But something in his delivery made it sound disarmingly genuine. They talked about charity, about art, about how much both of them hated small talk, even as they were forced to swim in it. Damian told stories of his modest beginnings in Texas, how he worked nights through college, how Wall Street had nearly eaten him alive until he fought his way to the top. His accent, faintly southern, softened every word. For Lila, who lived in a world of polished men who spoke in stock reports and quarterly earnings, Damian felt different, grounded, real, human. And for Damian, this was the easiest con he'd ever pulled. He didn't have to chase her. She walked right into his illusion. From across the ballroom, Charles Montgomery watched the two of them. He'd seen men like Damian before, charming, ambitious, perfectly timed. But his daughter was smiling for the first time in months, and that was all he needed to see to silence the voice in his head that whispered, "Be careful." When the gala finally wound down, Damian offered to walk Lila out. The autumn air outside was crisp, sharp enough to make her cheeks glow. On the curb, under the hum of the city, he brushed a stray hair from her face. "I'd like to see you again," he said simply. She hesitated, then nodded. "I'd like that too," as her car pulled away. She glanced back once, catching him watching her from the curb, that same confident smile still fixed in place. But what she couldn't see, what no one could, was Damian pulling out his phone, turning away from the lights, and whispering into the receiver, "Yeah, she's perfect, just like you said." That was the night everything began. The night Lila Montgomery fell for a man who would turn her fairy tale into a trap. For weeks after that gala, Lila Montgomery lived inside a dream. She didn't know it had been written for her. Damian Rowe became the kind of man every woman's friends warned her didn't exist. Attentive without being clingy, ambitious without arrogance, funny without cruelty. He called every morning, sent orchids to her office just because, and remembered every detail she mentioned, from her favorite book to the childhood song her mother used to hum. He fit into her world so easily it almost felt suspicious. If only she'd known to be suspicious. Damian was charming everyone around her, too. At the Montgomery Foundation's board meetings, he offered market insights that made seasoned investors nod in agreement. He accompanied Lila to gallery openings, charity luncheons, even dinner with her father. Charles Montgomery, a man whose gut instincts had built an empire, found himself liking the young financier against his better judgment. Damian seemed polished, respectful, even deferential, a man who listened more than he talked, who spoke the language of power fluently yet humbly. The newspapers soon began to notice. New York's most eligible heiress finds her match. One headline read beside a glossy photo of the couple leaving the plaza. To outsiders, it was a love story written in gold. But what the papers didn't know, what even Lila didn't know, was that Damien's world was already collapsing behind the scenes. His so-called firm, Row Capital, was a ghost, a name printed on a WeWork mailbox, and an empty virtual office. His record profits were fiction. The truth. Damien was drowning in over $15 million in debt, owed to a network of shadowy lenders who didn't take late payments lightly. They had already threatened him once in Chicago. The next warning would come in blood. When he met Lila, she wasn't a chance encounter. She was a lifeline, her wealth, her innocence. Her family's trust were everything he needed to buy time, pay off his debts, and rebuild his empire on stolen ground. So he played the role perfectly. In December, he surprised her with a sapphire ring. Antique, he said, passed down from his grandmother. I knew the second I saw it. It belonged on your hand. The blue stone caught the city lights as Lila cried, overwhelmed, believing every word. From that moment on, everything accelerated. Trips to Europe, lavish dinners, whispered promises of forever. When Damien proposed in Paris, on the top of the Eiffel Tower with a private orchestra below, she said yes before he even finished the question. By the time they returned to New York, the engagement was on every social page. The city called it a modern fairy tale. Only Charles Montgomery hesitated. Are you sure you know this man, Lila? He asked gently one night. His background check came up thinner than I expected. She smiled, wrapping her arms around him. Dad, please. He's the one. You always told me to trust my heart. And because Charles loved his daughter more than he trusted his instincts, he nodded. The wedding date was set for June, and Damien Rowe, the man with everything to lose, was finally about to claim his perfect prize. June arrived in New York wrapped in heat and anticipation. Society magazines called it the wedding of the decade. St. Patrick's Cathedral was transformed into a field of white orchids and silk ribbons, with every pew filled by the city's elite. Financiers, socialites, even a senator or two. The photographers lined up outside the iron gates, flashes bursting like fireworks as the motorcade arrived. Inside, the orchestra began to play a soft waltz as Lila Montgomery, radiant in a Vera Wang gown that shimmered like water, stood before a tall mirror. Her father, Charles, adjusted the diamond tiara resting on her golden hair, the same heirloom worn by generations of Montgomery brides. His eyes watered as he whispered, "You look just like your mother did." For a moment, she wasn't the heiress to a fortune. She was just a daughter, a woman in love, and the whole world felt right. At the end of the aisle, Damien Rowe waited, the picture of calm confidence in a black Tom Ford tuxedo. His smile looked genuine, his eyes warm. When the doors opened and Lila began her slow walk toward him, guests audibly gasped. Her beauty was ethereal, almost cinematic. Every step echoed to the marble cathedral, a heartbeat in the silence. When the vows were spoken, Damien's voice barely wavered. "For richer or for poorer," he said. And though the congregation smiled at the irony, only he knew how literal those words were. The reception that followed at the Plaza Hotel was a blur of luxury. Champagne towers, a 12-tier cake, a live jazz orchestra. Guests toasted the couple under chandeliers that glittered like constellations. Lila danced barefoot by the end of the night, laughing in her new husband's arms. To anyone watching, theirs was a storybook love. But in the small cracks between the music and the laughter, shadows stirred. Several times that evening, Damien stepped away to take phone calls, his voice low, his expression tight. When Lila teasingly asked who it was, he smiled. "Just work, my love. You know how investors are, even on your wedding day." She laughed and let it go, never noticing the tremor in his hands when he poured himself another drink. Later, as the guests prepared to leave, he pulled Charles aside with an easy grin. "Thank you for trusting me with her, sir. I promise she'll never want for anything." Charles returned the smile, but felt a flicker of unease he couldn't name. Damien's eyes, calm, calculating, reminded him too much of men who had tried to buy his company years ago, predators who hid behind perfect suits. Still, When Lila hugged him goodbye outside the hotel, promising to call every day, he brushed off the feeling. "Enjoy your honeymoon," he said softly. "You both deserve the world." As the limousine rolled away, flower petals scattered behind it like confetti. Reporters shouted questions, cameras flashed, and the fairy tale seemed to reach its crescendo. What no one noticed was Damien, inside the car, watching the city fade behind tinted glass, his jaw set in quiet determination. The phone in his pocket buzzed once, a message that simply read, "The clock's ticking. You know what to do." By the time the plane lifted off from Maui, the game was already in motion. Lila rested her head on his shoulder, dreaming of sunsets and sand. Damien stared out the window, his reflection in the dark glass hollow and cold. For her, Hawaii was the beginning of forever. For him, it was the countdown to the end. The sky above Maui was a kind of blue that didn't seem real, endless, glossy, perfect. When the private jet touched down, Lila Montgomery pressed her face to the window, her eyes lighting up like a child's. "It's even more beautiful than I imagined," she whispered. Damien Rose smiled, brushing a hand against her shoulder. "Only the best of my wife," he said smoothly, and for a moment he almost sounded sincere. Their suite at the Four Palms Hotel overlooked the Pacific. It had everything: a private infinity pool, floor-to-ceiling windows, and a terrace that caught every color of the sunset. To the staff, they were the perfect newlyweds, glamorous, generous, unshakably in love. Every morning, Lila ordered breakfast on the terrace, bare feet curled under a chair as Damien read the financial news. Every night, they walked along the beach, hand in hand under lantern light. For the first 3 days, paradise lived up to its promise. But slowly, cracks began to form. It started small, Damien growing irritated when she spent too long on the phone with her father. "We're on our honeymoon," he reminded her, smiling but tight-lipped. Maybe give the real world a break. Then came the comments about her clothes, her spending, the way she talked to hotel staff. "You don't need to be so friendly with everyone," he said one afternoon, his tone sharp enough to sting. Lila laughed it off, calling it jet lag, new marriage nerves, anything but what it truly was: control. By the 5th day, Damien had stopped pretending. He began locking himself in the study area of the suite with his laptop, claiming to be handling a client crisis. The phone calls stretched late into the night, his voice cold and businesslike. Once, Lila heard him say, "No, she doesn't know. Just give me one more week." When she asked about it, he snapped, "Don't eavesdrop on things you don't understand." The warmth was gone from his eyes, replaced by something calculating, dangerous. When she tried to book a surf lesson the next morning, he canceled it without asking. "You're not insured. It's too risky." When she mentioned wanting to explore town, he frowned. "Not alone. It's not safe." When she asked to call her father again, he took her phone. "Battery's dead," he said casually, though she'd charged it that morning. By the end of the week, the hotel staff noticed. The maid saw tear marks on Lila's pillow. The bartender said she never ordered a drink without Damien's permission. The concierge mentioned how she'd stopped smiling when spoken to. Still, no one dared interfere with a rich couple on their honeymoon. The breaking point came on the 9th day. Lila had transferred a large donation to one of the Montgomery Foundation's children's hospitals, something she'd always done after major milestones. When Damien saw the notification on his tablet, his face darkened. "You moved money without telling me?" he barked. "It's my money, Damien. It's charity." His hand slammed against the table, rattling the silverware. "You don't touch the accounts without me. Not ever." For the first time, Lila saw the man behind the mask, the desperation in his eyes, the fury he'd worked so hard to hide. That night, while Damien showered, she sat the vanity and began to write a letter, her hands trembling as she put pen to paper. "Dad, something's wrong. He's not who I thought. Please come for me." She sealed it quickly and tucked it into her purse, planning to ask the maid to mail it in the morning. Outside, waves crashed softly against the rocks, the sound gentle and deceiving. To everyone else, the couple in Suite 408 were still honeymooners living the dream. But behind those glass walls overlooking the sea, paradise was starting to rot. The morning sun spilled to the curtains of Suite 408, painting gold streaks across the white sheets where Lila Montgomery sat, the folded letter hidden inside her purse. She hadn't slept much. Every creak of the suite, every gust of wind against the balcony glass, had set her nerves on edge. Damian Rowe was on the terrace, talking on his phone again, voice clipped and cold. "No, she doesn't suspect a thing," he said. "I'll transfer the assets once we're back in New York." Lila's chest tightened. Every word confirmed what her instincts had been screaming for days. He wasn't just controlling, he was lying. And if he could lie this easily, what else was he capable of? She waited until he went to shower, then quietly slipped out into the hallway. Near the lobby, she found a hotel waitress named Nora Vasquez, a kind woman who had chatted with her earlier about the beach. "Could you mail this for me?" Lila asked, voice trembling slightly. "It's just a letter to my father in New York." Nora smiled. "Of course, Mrs. Rowe. I'll drop it off right after my shift." But fate and Damian's paranoia had other plans. Minutes later, as Lila ordered coffee in the dining area, she saw him at the front desk, his charm turned back on like a mask. "My wife misplaced a letter," he told the receptionist with a warm grin. "She's a bit forgetful sometimes. Has anyone seen it?" The receptionist hesitated, then called over Nora. Lila watched in horror as Nora, unaware of the truth, handed over the envelope. When Damian's eyes met hers across the room, the smile never left his lips, but something behind it had changed. He said nothing on the elevator ride back to their suite. The silence was unbearable. Lila could feel his anger radiating through the air, heavier with each passing floor. Inside the room, he tossed the letter onto the bed, the handwriting glaring up like confession. "What is this?" he asked quietly, his voice low and dangerous. "Damian, You what? You went behind my back? You think I wouldn't find out?" Her throat tightened. "You've been lying to me. You've been controlling me. I'm scared of you." That last sentence seemed to hit him harder than a slap. His face contorted. Shame, rage, fear, all bleeding together. "Scared of me," he repeated. "After everything I've done for you?" "You did it for yourself," she cried. "You married me for money." The words snapped something inside him. His hand shot out, gripping her shoulders, shaking her. "Don't you dare." "Let go of me," she screamed, struggling to break free. In the chaos, her heel slipped on the rug. She fell backward, and her skull struck the sharp corner of the marble table with a sickening crack. For a moment, time stopped. Damian froze, staring at the blood spreading across the pale carpet. "Lila," he whispered, kneeling beside her, pressing his hands against her motionless body. "Oh, God. No, no, no." But panic soon replaced grief. Within minutes, he was wiping surfaces, turning on the shower, scattering her makeup on the counter. He rehearsed his words, glancing in the mirror until his face showed the right kind of horror. At 10:30 p.m., his voice echoed to phone to the hotel desk. "My wife slipped in the bathroom. Please help us. She's not breathing." By the time paramedics arrived, the stage was set, and Damian Rowe, tears streaming down his face, played his final act as the grieving husband who'd lost the love of his life. When Detective Rebecca Dane arrived at the Four Palms Hotel that night, the suite already smelled of bleach and sea salt. The call had come in as a domestic accident. A newlywed bride, dead from a fall in the shower. Routine. Tragic. Closed case material. But the moment Rebecca stepped inside, she knew something didn't fit. The scene looked too clean. The bathroom tiles glistened like they'd just been scrubbed. A faint chemical scent lingered beneath the floral air freshener. And the husband, Damian Rowe, sat on the sofa with his head in his hands. Face pale, suit sleeves rolled to his elbows, playing the perfect role of the devastated widower. "Detective Dane, Maui PD," she introduced herself. "This your wife?" He nodded slowly, eyes glassy. We were getting ready for bed. I went for a run, came back, and she was just lying there." His voice cracked on cue. Rebecca studied him for a long second. Everything about him, His posture, his phrasing, his carefully timed breaths, screamed rehearsed. Her partner, Detective Chris Forrester, was already talking to the paramedics. Body's got blunt force trauma to the back of the head. One EMT whispered, "Looks like she hit the table, not the floor. Odd angle." Rebecca's eyes flicked toward the marble coffee table a few feet away, and the faint smear of blood someone had tried to scrub clean. "Odd angle," she repeated quietly. She crouched near the table's base, running a gloved finger along the edge. The streak was small but unmistakable. Blood. Meanwhile, Forrester questioned the maid, Maria Hernandez, a quiet woman with tired eyes. Mrs. Rowe seemed frightened. Maria said softly, "Yesterday, she was crying. I saw bruises on her wrists, like someone had grabbed her." Rebecca made a note. "Did she ever ask for help?" Maria hesitated. "No, but she looked like she wanted to." As officers canvassed the hallway, another inconsistency surfaced. The security cameras outside Suite 408 had mysteriously lost power at 9 p.m., the same time Damien claimed to have gone for a jog. "Convenient outage," Forrester muttered. Rebecca stepped onto the balcony, the ocean's dark expanse stretching endlessly below. The world looked peaceful from up here, too peaceful for what had just happened inside. She thought about the victim's father, thousands of miles away, probably waiting for a good night call that would never come. When she returned inside, Damien was wiping his face with tissue, careful not to smear his expression. "You have to understand," he said, voice trembling. "We were so happy. I loved her." Rebecca tilted her head, her tone calm but cutting. "You have scratches on your neck. How'd you get those?" His hand moved to cover them almost instinctively. "From the beach earlier. We went swimming." She didn't respond. She just looked at him, long enough for him to start squirming. By dawn, forensic techs had turned the suite upside down. Under ultraviolet light, the room glowed with faint traces of blood, wiped, not washed away. Fibers from Lila's torn blouse were found in the trash, mixed with paper towels and cleaning cloths. Then came the most damning discovery: a safe tucked behind a false wall panel. Inside were fake passports, offshore bank statements, and insurance paperwork dated one day before the wedding. Rebecca exhaled slowly. So much for an accident. As the sun rose over Maui, the paradise Damien had sold to the world started to unravel. The honeymoon was over, and Detective Dane had just found her first real suspect. The interrogation room at the Maui Police Department was quiet, save for the low hum of the fluorescent light above. Damien Rose sat at the metal table, hands clasped, a paper cup of untouched water sweating beside him. His designer shirt was wrinkled now, his tie gone. The performance of the grieving husband had faded, replaced by the cold, calculating stare of a man who realized the show was almost over. Detective Rebecca Dane entered the room with a thin file under her arm. "Morning, Mr. Rowe," she said evenly. "Rough night." He didn't respond. She sat across from him, flipping open the folder. Inside were photographs, the marble table corner with traces of blood, the ultraviolet images of clean stains, the torn blouse fibers, the hidden safe with forged documents. Each one landed on the table, like a nail being hammered in. "You said your wife slipped in the shower," Rebecca began. "But the blood we found wasn't in the bathroom. It was under this table." "Want to explain that?" Damien's jaw tightened. "You're twisting things." She fell. "I panicked. I tried to clean up." Rebecca's tone didn't change. "You didn't panic, Mr. Rowe. You planned." She placed another photo in front of him, a copy of the $5 million life insurance policy he'd taken out the day before the wedding. "You made sure you'd benefit the most from her accident." Across the table, Detective Chris Forrester entered, holding a new folder. "We spoke to your old associates in Chicago," he said. "Seems you left quite the mess behind. Fraud, fake investments, and some very unhappy creditors." Damien's eyes flickered. "You don't know what you're talking about." Rebecca leaned forward, voice low. "We know enough. You were drowning in debt. You saw Lila as your lifeline, the perfect mark. You built an entire fantasy to trap her. Fake fun, fake fortune, fake love. But when she found out..." She paused, letting the silence stretch. You killed her. For a long moment, Damien said nothing. His breathing grew shallow. Then, like a thread snapping, his shoulders slumped. They would have killed me, he whispered. The people I owed. I didn't have a choice. Rebecca didn't blink. You always have a choice. You just pick greed. He stared down at his hands, words spilling out now, fragments, excuses, confessions. It was supposed to look like an accident. She saw the papers. She knew everything. She tried to run. I grabbed her. I didn't mean to. His voice broke. I didn't mean to kill her. Forrester recorded the confession in silence. When Damien finally looked up, his eyes were hollow. I loved her, he muttered. Rebecca stood, collecting the file. No, she said quietly. You love what she could give you. The trial in Honolulu drew national headlines. The honeymoon killer, from Wall Street to death row, the heiress and the con man. The courtroom was packed when Charles Montgomery took the stand. His voice trembled as he described how Damien had gained his trust, how he'd watched his daughter fall for a man who saw her as a payday. She thought she was marrying love, he said, but she married a lie. The prosecution presented a meticulous case. The forged prenup, the insurance, the offshore accounts, the erased security footage. Every detail pointed to one thing: premeditation. Damien's defense tried to paint him as a desperate man under pressure, claiming temporary emotional breakdown. But the jury wasn't swayed, not after hearing the recording of his call to creditors. She's exactly what I thought she'd be, naive and perfect. After 3 hours of deliberation, the verdict came back: guilty of first-degree murder, fraud, and forgery. When the judge read the sentence, life imprisonment without parole, Damien barely flinched. But when he turned toward Charles Montgomery, their eyes met for the first time since the arrest. I'm sorry, he said softly. Charles didn't respond. He just whispered, so is she. As guards led Damien away, the cameras clicked, capturing the final image of a man who once fooled an entire city. Now shackled, had bowed, his empire of lies reduced to ash. The months that followed the trial moved slowly, as if time itself was mourning. The newspapers eventually moved on to new scandals, new tragedies. But for Charles Montgomery, every day still began and ended in silence. His penthouse, once filled with the sound of his daughter's laughter and music drifting from her piano, had become a shrine to what he'd lost. Lila's room remained untouched, her books stacked neatly, the orchid she loved replaced by silk ones that would never die. The world knew her story. They called it the Maui honeymoon murder. But to Charles, it was simply the night he lost the only person who ever made his life mean something more than money. 6 months after the verdict, he stood before a small audience at a quiet press conference in Midtown Manhattan. Behind him, a large banner read, "The Lila Montgomery Foundation for Victims of Domestic Manipulation and Abuse." His voice shook slightly as he began. My daughter believed in love, he said. She believed people were good. That trust was something sacred, and someone took advantage of that belief. She saw the best in a man who had the worst of himself. If her story can help even one person recognize the danger before it's too late, then her life won't have been taken in vain. The cameras flashed, reporters scribbling notes, but Charles barely noticed them. He could still hear her laughter in his memory, the way she used to call him Dad, not Father, the way she'd reach for his hand in a crowd. Those details haunted him more than the trial ever could. In the back row of the press conference, detectives Rebecca Dane and Chris Forrester watched quietly. They hadn't come for publicity, only closure. Rebecca held a small envelope in her hand, something that had arrived a week earlier from the Hawaii State Penitentiary. She hadn't opened it yet. After the event, she and Forrester walked down the street together, the city cold and gray. You think he's really sorry? Chris asked, nodding toward the unopened envelope. Rebecca sighed. People like Damien Rowe are always sorry, just never soon enough. She finally tore it open. Inside was a single page, handwritten in a shaky scrawl. Detective Dane. I see her eyes every night. I hear the sound when she fell. It doesn't stop. I know I can't fix what I did, but I think you should know I did love her. Maybe not the way she deserved, but I did. Damien, Rebecca folded the letter carefully, then slipped it into her case file marked hashtag 2043, HNL, R, the honeymoon homicide. Remorse doesn't bring her back, she said softly. It never does. Weeks later, Rebecca and Forrester visited the Lila Montgomery Foundation headquarters, a glass building filled with light, flowers, and portraits of smiling women who had survived abusive relationships. Charles greeted them personally, his face thinner, older, but with a steadiness that hadn't been there before. She'd have loved this place, Forrester said, looking around. She would have built it herself. Charles replied with a faint smile. Only, I wish she hadn't needed to inspire it. He guided them into a small office lined with framed letters from women across the country, survivors who had seen parts of themselves in Lila's story. One note read, "Because of her, I left before he could hurt me." Another, "I saw the signs because of your daughter's case. I'm alive because she isn't." Charles's eyes glistened as he looked up. Every one of these letters reminds me that she's still helping people. Even now. Rebecca nodded. You turned her tragedy into light, Mr. Montgomery. That takes strength. He smiled faintly. No, detective. That takes guilt. Strength would have been saving her when I still could. Forrester looked at him. You couldn't have known. Charles shook his head slowly. I could have, but I didn't want to believe what my instincts told me, that the man she loved wasn't real. He looked out the window toward the skyline. We raise our daughters to see the good in people. Maybe we should also teach them to recognize evil when it smiles. That night, as Rebecca drove back to her apartment, the case played in her mind. Not the crime, not even the trial, but the moments before it all unraveled. A letter that almost made it to father. A frightened girl no one dared question. A monster hidden behind perfect charm. She pulled over near the water and sat for a while, watching the city lights ripple across the Hudson. In her line of work, stories like Lila's weren't rare. They were just quieter. Women trapped behind walls of wealth or secrecy, their pain disguised by perfection. Her voice was low when she finally spoke, more to herself than anyone. Love isn't supposed to kill you, but it does, every time it blinds you. In prison, Damien Rowe lived a ghost of a life. He kept to himself, reading newspapers about the foundation bearing his victim's name. Once a month, he wrote a letter to no one, describing the ocean outside his cell window, the same ocean that had witnessed his crime. He never mailed them. The guard said he often woke screaming. But outside those gray walls, the world kept moving. The foundation grew. Laws were passed expanding protections for domestic abuse survivors. Every year, on the anniversary of Lila's death, a vigil was held in Central Park, rows of candles, white orchids, and sapphire ribbons glinting in the night. Charles Montgomery always stood in the front row, hand on his heart, as hundreds of people whisper her name. At the end of the ceremony, he would read her favorite line from The Great Gatsby. So we beat on, boats against the current, borne back ceaselessly into the past. It wasn't about wealth or tragedy anymore. It was about love, the kind that endures even when everything else has been stolen away. And somewhere between the glow of the candles and the hush of the crowd, her story became more than a headline. It became a warning, a memorial, and, in its own quiet way, a promise to see behind the smile, to listen when something feels wrong, and to remember that even in the most beautiful places, monsters can wear tuxedos.